Greetings and welcome. I am JustaVOR, bringing you what I hope is constructive information on what the system of white supremacy, racism, is and how it works, as well as what can be done to replace it with the system of justice. Suspected racist gets the royal treatment while victim fights for his life. Ralph Yarl. On April 13, 2023, 16-year-old Ralph Yarl, a black classified male, was attempting to pick up his younger brothers from an address near 115th Street in Kansas City, Missouri. He rang the doorbell of the home of Andrew D. Lester, 84-year-old suspected racist. What Ralph Yarl did not know was that he was at the wrong address. He was actually a block over from where his siblings were waiting for him. After ringing the doorbell, the racist suspect, Andrew D. Lester, answered the door. Upon seeing Ralph, Andrew shot 16-year-old Ralph Yarl several times. Ralph, with multiple wounds and not having his cell phone with him, ran from house to house seeking help before he found someone willing to help him. It took 3 attempts to find help. The suspected racist, Andrew D. Lester, told law enforcement officials that he thought someone was breaking into his home, and when he peered through the window, seeing Ralph Yarl standing there on his porch, he became fearful for his life and responded by shooting Ralph in an act of self-defense.
Breaking news from Kansas City, Missouri tonight. An 85-year-old white man has just been charged in the shooting of a black teenager who rang his doorbell by mistake. It follows a weekend of protests over the shooting. Maggie Vespa joins us live now. Maggie, what charges does he face?
Lester prosecutors in Clay County say 85-year-old Andrew Lester faces 1 count of assault in the first degree and 1 count of armed criminal action. And they add there was a, quote, racial component in this shooting of a teenage boy who family says made a simple mistake and went to the wrong home.
In the days following the shooting, Ralph Yarl, a 16-year-old black child, was fighting for his life. Meanwhile, Andrew D. Lester, the shooter, was allowed to move about freely as he was not arrested and charged until April 17, 2023, 4 days later. The county prosecutors acknowledged that racism played a role in Ralph Yarl being shot.
As the prosecutor of Clay County, I can tell you there was a racial component to the case.
Can you elaborate?
I'm not sure. I mean, what do you mean?
On this channel, we have concluded that the terms racism and white supremacy are synonymous and interchangeable, having the same definition, which is as follows: a global system of people who classify themselves as white and who are dedicated to the mistreatment and subjugation of all those they have classified as not white. According to the United Independent Compensatory Code System concept, a compensatory counter-racist code, as written by Mr. Neely Jr., we are reminded that the 2 basic methods of practicing racism, white supremacy, are deceit, which can be defined as subtle and or indirect violence. This is when racists say things that are not true, or when they influence non-white people to believe things that are not true in order to get victims to submit to and or cooperate with the system of white supremacy. The other basic method of practicing racism, white supremacy is direct violence, which includes threats of violence. This is when racists, white supremacists use or threaten to use direct or indirect bodily harm against non-white people who do not submit to and or cooperate with the white supremacists in a satisfactory manner. In the shooting of Ralph Yarl, we're seeing how deceit and direct violence operate on a spectrum to maintain, expand, and or refine the system of white supremacy, racism. I think it is rather evident that Ralph was shot because being classified as black in a system of white supremacy, a system based on those who classify themselves as white attempting to maintain genetic survival and prevent genetic annihilation, as per Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. Ralph, as a black male, is considered a threat and therefore is targeted for mistreatment. For more information about why those who classify themselves as white find it necessary to mistreat or even kill non-white people, especially those classified as black, I suggest viewing our previous video entitled Dr. Francis Cress Welsing and her theory of color confrontation and racism, white supremacy. I have included a link in the description. I would also suggest studying the ISIS papers, The Keys to the Colors, by Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. This shooting itself is part of the direct violence aspect of racism, white supremacy. but it is in the aftermath that we have seen how deception plays its role. While Ralph barely survived his wounds and was in the hospital clinging to his life, Andrew D. Lester, the admitted shooter, was questioned by law enforcement for only 2 hours before being released without charges. Isn't that how it generally goes? Violence is committed by white people against non-white people, and the excuse used is that they feared for their life. This claim of fear has been used in the past to excuse white killers by villainizing their non-white victims. Here's where deception seems to play its role. For starters, some suspected racists are demonstrating that they are on code by continuing to place blame and suspicion on the victim, Ralph Yarl, asking what he was wearing and why he actually went to Lester's home, even though it was clearly stated that Ralph intended to pick up his brothers from 115th Terrace, but went to 115th Street by mistake. This is only one way racists look after one another, right or wrong, continuing to blame victims of racism. Another way is when they throw one another under the bus to make it appear as if racism is not being practiced, or that racism, white supremacy is not playing a part in what is taking place. This is seen when a suspected racist is practicing racism too overtly and other suspects step in to call them out for their acts of racism. In this incident, it took days of people protesting before Andrew D. Lester was finally charged. Even so, he was only held for 2 hours before being released from jail, and was only charged with 2 felony counts, one being assault and the other being a charge related to using a weapon in the commission of a felony. No attempted murder charge, no hate crime charge. According to the district attorney, this method of charging the suspected racist terrorist Andrew D. Lester will result in the longest prison sentence possible, if he is convicted, and a hate crime charge in Missouri would create a double jeopardy scenario. This geriatric race soldier is in his mid-80s. He might not even make it to C trial. If that is the case, he will still be allowed to die peacefully at home. The same home where he attempted to murder the 16-year-old black teen Ralph Yarl, because Lester was still allowed to post bail. If he is convicted, the very least he should get is life in prison. But that type of sentence is already looking very unlikely. And of course, there were more protests resulting from his being allowed to post bail. People who classify themselves as white being allegedly outraged at violence committed by their fellow race members and standing side by side with victims of racism is nothing new. But the system of white supremacy has continued. In fact, these efforts by white people to console non-white people while indicting, so to speak, the overt acts of racism committed against non-white people have only worked to refine the system of white supremacy racism. In the aftermath of this vicious attack on Ralph Yarl, current President Joe Biden has spoken with his parents. Ralph Yarl's aunt organized a GoFundMe, which has reached over $3 million. His care unit has been interviewed by several media outlets to discuss the emotional impact this racist attempt to murder Ralph has had on Ralph and his loved ones. It would appear that racists are racially showcasing these victims of white supremacy, all in an effort to refine the system of white supremacy, racism. I noticed there has been no talk of ending the system. There is barely any talk of how racism played a part in this attack and its aftermath. These tactics by the white people in power appear to be about refining the system, not actually ending it. According to the code, the term refinement of white supremacy means to improve the methods of maintaining white supremacy. This means that the white supremacists work to decrease the necessity for using direct violence and or the threats of direct violence against non-white people. They instead act to increase the use of deceit as the basic means of causing their victims to enjoy and or not resist their subjugation to white supremacy. No matter what VORs have done in an attempt to end the system of white supremacy, the white supremacists have found ways to refine the system, to make it work better for the white supremacists. Ending formal slavery and letting enslaved victims of racism out of the physical chains can be seen as one way the system was refined. Allegedly ending Jim Crow segregation and implementing their idea of integration can be viewed as another method of refinement. Question: How many times have we seen black people go to white people in need of help, but instead end up losing their lives to the very people they sought out for help? Renisha McBride was involved in a car accident and went to knock on the door of a nearby resident, Theodore Wafer, white male, who then shot and killed Renisha. Jonathan A. Farrell was also shot after being involved in a car accident and seeking help from residents nearby. He knocked on a door, and a white woman who lived there saw this black male and called law enforcement officials, who arrived promptly, and Jonathan was shot 10 times by Officer Randall West Carrick, killing Jonathan. Randall West Carrick was never convicted of killing Jonathan Farrell. Ralph Yarl knocked on the wrong door. Only a block over from the intended address he was attempting to pick up his siblings from. Luckily, he survived. A common pattern seen in how victims of racism respond to these acts of racism, white supremacy, demonstrates the effectiveness of the tactic of deception that suspected racists use. When direct violence awakens us, racial deception is used to lull us back to sleep or to some other forms of pacification, such as racial showcasing or racial shadowboxing. After the shooting of Ralph Yarl, I have seen victims of white supremacy express their confusion, saying things like, "I don't understand how this could happen."
I did not understand how something like that could happen within city limits, and for the police to allow that, question him shortly for just 2 hours and release him, knowing that any of us would have done that and we would not have ever been released from jail.
Or expressing their lack of ability to come up with effective solutions to solve the problem.
The only thing we can really do is just, like be in a group and get together and be loud about it.
It can be clearly seen the confusion victims of racism suffer from. Not understanding how or why these incidents continue to happen, and not understanding what to do to solve the problem. The code points out to us that confusion is one way the white supremacists keep victims from ending the problem of racism. But what can VORs do to solve this problem of white supremacy and save the lives of non-white children, and all children for that matter? What can be done to end the global system of white supremacy and replace it with a system of justice? Justice meaning balance between people, guaranteeing that no person is mistreated, and guaranteeing that the person who needs help the most gets the most constructive help. First, we need to understand what racism is and how it works. Secondly, we need a code of behavior that is focused on solving the problem without creating new problems. For a more in-depth overview of how to solve the problem of white supremacy, I have included a link in the description to a video entitled "How to End Racism" for the VORs. Question: how would Ralph Yarl's shooting have been prevented if he and his care unit, meaning his attempted parents, aunt, and siblings, were less confused about the system of racism, white supremacy? How would adopting a counter-racist code have helped Ralph Yarl and his loved ones become less mistreated? Feel free to leave your questions, comments, and concerns. For more information about the purpose and goals of this channel, as well as some basic definitions of words and terms we use in reference to our work, I have included a link below to a video containing this information. If you would like an even better understanding of the code and how it works, please visit ProduceJustice.com to order the United Independent Compensatory Code System concept by Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. There are many constructive suggestions for ending the system of white supremacy, and Mr. Fuller's code book and his word guide act as guides to getting and keeping on code. If you feel this content is constructive and worth your time and energy, please subscribe and share to support the making of more content in the future. Much appreciation for all the VORs already subscribed. I am JustaVOR, and I'm still learning. Thank you for watching. Until next time.
Let me say something that gets to the very crux of the matter, and this may be offensive for some to hear who are not on the side that we're on. White people, we have been the problem for 400 years.
Say that again.
Let me say it one more time for those of you who didn't hear me. White people, we have been the problem for 400 years.